The sound of a lone gunshot ricocheted through the valley as Owen Fairchild reloaded his Winchester rifle and took aim at another empty whiskey bottle perched on the fence post. It was April 1875, and the Montana Territory landscape was beginning to shake off winter's grip, though the chill in Owen's heart remained frozen as the letters in his saddlebag seemed to weigh heavier than any physical burden he'd carried in his 32 years of life. "That's the last of him," he muttered to himself, holstering his rifle and mounting his chestnut mare. The sun was beginning to set over the jagged mountains that bordered the wide open plains of Blackwater Ridge, casting long shadows across the land he'd called home for nearly 3 years now. 3 years since Elizabeth had been laid to rest. 3 years of talking to ghosts through ink on paper. The ride back to his homestead took less than an hour, a modest cabin situated on 20 acres of land that he'd purchased with the money he'd saved from his cattle driving days. As he approached, he could see smoke rising from the chimney. His ranch hand, Jeremiah, must have started a fire to ward off the evening chill. "Caught yourself some dinner?" Jeremiah asked as Owen dismounted, noticing the pair of rabbits tied to his saddle. Owen nodded, handing the reins to the older man. "Should be enough for both of us. You heading into town tomorrow? Was planning on it. Need anything?" "Just the mail," Owen replied, his voice dropping almost imperceptibly. Jeremiah gave a knowing nod but said nothing more. The old-timer had been with Owen since he'd first staked his claim and knew better than to press about certain matters. After a simple dinner of rabbit stew, Owen bid Jeremiah good night and retreated to his room. From beneath his bed, he pulled out a weathered wooden box, its brass hinges tarnished with age. Inside lay dozens of letters, some yellowed with age, others newer but no less precious. He selected one at random, unfolding the delicate paper with careful fingers. "My dearest Owen," it began in Elizabeth's elegant script. "The winter here in St. Louis has been unusually harsh, but the thought of you warms me more than any fire could." He read until his eyes grew heavy, until the words blurred before him, and still he continued, speaking responses aloud as though she might somehow hear him across the vast divide of death. "I miss you, Lizzie," he whispered to the empty room. "Each day without you is an eternity." Dawn broke over Blackwater Ridge, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Owen rose with the sun, his morning routine unchanged for years: feed the horses, check the fence line, practice his shooting. By midday, Jeremiah had returned from town with supplies and, as expected, mail. "Letter came for you," the ranch hand said, handing over an envelope. "Postmark says Colorado Territory." Owen took it with a frown. "I don't know anyone in Colorado." "Also heard tell of a new widow moved into the old Peterson place," Jeremiah continued, unpacking goods. "Name's Willow Sullivan. Husband was killed in a mining accident 6 months back. She's got a young boy, about 5 or 6 I reckon." Owen barely acknowledged the information, his attention fixed on the unexpected letter. Inside was a brief note from a lawyer in Denver, informing him that a distant cousin had passed and left him a small inheritance. It wasn't much, a few $100s and some personal effects, but it required his signature in person to claim. "I'll be heading to Denver," he announced, folding the letter. "Probably be gone a week or so." Jeremiah nodded. "I can manage things here. When you leaving?" "Tomorrow. No sense in delaying." That evening, Owen sat once more with his box of letters, reading them by lamplight as if seeking permission from Elizabeth for his journey. "It's just business, Lizzie," he explained to the silent room. "Nothing more." The train to Denver was crowded with miners, businessmen, and families looking to stake their claim in the booming frontier city. Owen kept to himself, watching the landscape change from the open plains of Montana to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. His thoughts, as always, drifted to Elizabeth and the life they'd planned together before consumption had claimed her far too young. After settling his business in Denver, a surprisingly simple affair that took only 2 days, Owen found himself with time to spare before the return journey. The inheritance was modest: $300 and a pocket watch that had belonged to his mother's cousin, a man he'd never met. On his 3rd evening in the city, he found himself in a saloon near the train station. nursing a whiskey and watching a poker game unfold at a nearby table. He wasn't much for gambling, but the distraction was welcome. "Mind if I join you?" A woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. Owen looked up to see a lady in her late 20s, dressed in a simple but elegant dark blue dress, her blonde hair pinned up neatly beneath a modest hat. She wasn't the sort one typically found in a saloon unaccompanied. "Madam," he said, standing as manners dictated. "I'm not sure this is the kind of establishment. I'm quite aware of where I am, sir," she replied with a hint of amusement. "I'm looking for information, not company, and you have the look of someone who minds his own business." Intrigued despite himself, Owen gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Owen Fairchild," he offered. "Winifred Sanderson," she replied, seating herself with practiced grace. "I'm searching for my brother. He was last seen in this area 3 months ago." For the next hour, Owen listened as Winifred explained her situation. Her brother, a geologist working for a mining company, had disappeared while surveying potential claims. The company claimed he'd simply abandoned his post, but she was convinced something more sinister had occurred. "Why come to me with this?" Owen asked when she'd finished. Winifred smiled sadly. "Because you have honest eyes, Mr. Fairchild. And because the bartender said you mentioned Blackwater Ridge, which is where Timothy was headed when he vanished." Owen frowned. "I'm from there, but I've never heard of any geologist. It's a small community, everyone knows everyone's business." "Perhaps he never made it that far," she suggested. "My train leaves tomorrow afternoon, I had hoped." "I'm heading back in that direction myself," Owen found himself saying, surprising even himself. "If you'd like, I could ask around when I return." The gratitude in her eyes stirred something in him, a feeling he quickly suppressed. "That would be most kind, Mr. Fairchild. Might I write to you for news?" They exchanged information, and Owen promised to send word if he discovered anything about Timothy Sanderson. As he walked her to her hotel propriety, demanded no less, he found himself talking more than he had in months, telling her about his ranch, and even mentioning Elizabeth briefly. "I'm sorry for your loss," Winifred said softly as they reached her destination. "It's a special kind of pain, losing someone you love. You speak from experience, my husband," she admitted. "Yellow fever 2 years ago." Their eyes met in mutual understanding, and for a brief moment, Owen felt something other than the constant ache of grief, a recognition, perhaps, of shared suffering. "Good evening, Mrs. Sanderson," he said, tipping his hat. "Safe travels, Mr. Fairchild." The journey back to Blackwater Ridge gave Owen plenty of time to think. He found his thoughts drifting frequently to Winifred Sanderson and her missing brother, a welcome distraction from his usual preoccupation with Elizabeth's memory. By the time he arrived home, he had formulated a plan to inquire discreetly about Timothy among the miners and trappers who frequented the area. "Mail came for you while you were gone," Jeremiah informed him as Owen unpacked. "And that widow I mentioned. She came by yesterday looking for work. Seems she's a fair hand with horses and needs the income." Owen raised an eyebrow. "A woman breaking horses. Says she grew up on a ranch in Texas. Seemed to know what she was talking about. Told her you'd be back today and might have an answer for her." Owen sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "We could use the help with spring coming, I suppose. Tell her to come by tomorrow and I'll see what she can do." That night, after reading through his new letters, one from Elizabeth's mother and another, surprisingly, already from Winifred Sanderson thanking him for his kindness, Owen fell into a troubled sleep. He dreamed of Elizabeth, as he often did, but this time she seemed to be pushing him away, telling him something he couldn't quite hear. Morning brought Willow Sullivan to his door, a slender woman with auburn hair and determined green eyes. Her son, Daniel, hid partially behind her skirts, peering up at Owen with undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Fairchild," she greeted him, extending her hand with confidence unusual for a woman in these parts. "Thank you for considering me. I understand your hesitation, but I assure you I'm capable." Owen shook her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Mrs. Sullivan, Jeremiah tells me you have experience with horses. My father raised quarter horses in the Texas Panhandle. I helped break and train them from the time I could sit a saddle." For the next hour, Owen watched as Willow demonstrated her skills with a spirited 3-year-old gelding he'd acquired recently. Her technique was unorthodox but effective, and by the end of the demonstration, the horse was responding to her commands with surprising docility. "You've made your point, Mrs. Sullivan," Owen conceded, impressed despite his initial skepticism. "The position is yours if you want it. $3 a day with Sundays off." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you, Mr. Fairchild. When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow is fine." "You can bring your boy. There's a small cabin near the main house that you're welcome to use. It's not much, but it's sturdy." That evening, Owen found himself unusually restless. He took out Elizabeth's letters, as was his custom, but found it difficult to concentrate on the familiar words. Instead, his mind kept returning to the day's events: Willow Sullivan's competent handling of the horse, her son's shy smile when Owen had offered him a piece of hard candy, the way she'd efficiently unloaded her meager possessions from her wagon without asking for help. "She reminds me of you, Lizzie," he said aloud, holding one of the letters. "That same stubborn streak." He chuckled softly, imagining Elizabeth's indignant response. The following weeks established a new routine at the ranch. Willow proved herself invaluable, not only with the horses, but in spotting a sickness among the cattle before it could spread and suggesting improvements to the irrigation system for the small kitchen garden. Daniel, initially shy, gradually warmed to both Owen and Jeremiah, trailing after them with endless questions about ranch life. One evening in late May, as Owen sat on his porch watching the sunset with Elizabeth's letters spread on his lap, he spotted Willow approaching from the direction of her cabin. "Mr. Fairchild," she called, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. "I was wondering if I might borrow your copy of the Denver Post when you're finished with it. I like to keep up with news from the larger towns." Owen gathered the letters hastily. "Of course, I've already read it through." As she came closer, he saw her glance curiously at the scattered papers. "Family correspondence?" she asked politely. "In a manner of speaking," he replied, not elaborating. Willow hesitated, then said, "I noticed you often read them in the evenings. It's none of my business, of course, but it's just that I recognize the look," she said softly. "I had the same one for months after Caleb died. Every night, reading his old letters, answering them as if he could somehow hear me." Owen stiffened. "Mrs. Sullivan, please call me Willow." She sat down on the step below him, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't mean to pry, Mr. Fairchild. It's just, it helped me when someone pointed out what I was doing, talking to Caleb instead of living without him." "And who was this wise person?" Owen asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "My son, actually." Willow smiled sadly. "He asked me why I was talking to Papa when Papa was in heaven and couldn't hear me. Children have a way of cutting to the truth." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Her name was Elizabeth," Owen finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were to be married 3 years ago next month." Willow nodded but didn't press for more details. Instead, she simply said, "It doesn't stop hurting, but it does get easier to bear. At least that's what I'm told." She stood, brushing off her skirt. "Thank you for the newspaper, Mr. Fairchild. Good night." "Owen," he called after her. "If I'm to call you Willow, then you should call me Owen." She turned, offering a small smile. "Good night, Owen." That night, as he read Elizabeth's letters, Owen found himself more aware of the one-sided nature of his conversations. For the first time, he wondered if Willow was right if he was clinging to these paper memories at the expense of living in the present. The following Sunday, Owen rode into town to check for mail and make inquiries about Timothy Sanderson. At the general store, he casually mentioned the geologist to Walter Bishop, the proprietor who served as unofficial town gossip. "Can't say I recall any geologist," Bishop mused, stroking his beard. "Though there was a city fella came through in February, asking about mining claims north of here. Seemed more interested in maps than actual prospecting, if you ask me. Happened to catch his name." "Might have been Sanderson, now that you mention it. Educated sort, not your typical prospector. Bought supplies for a 2-week expedition, but I never saw him return." Owen frowned. "Any idea which direction he headed?" "North, toward the high country." Dangerous territory this time of year with the spring thaws and all. Bishop lowered his voice. Between you and me, there's been talk of claim jumpers up that way. Wouldn't surprise me if your friend ran afoul of them. That evening, Owen penned a letter to Winifred Sanderson, detailing what little information he'd gathered. As he wrote, he found himself adding personal notes commenting on the spring weather, mentioning Willow and Daniel, describing the foal born on the ranch the previous week. The letter grew longer than intended, and he hesitated before sealing it, wondering if such familiarity was appropriate. In the end, he left it as written, reasoning that a friendly tone might offer some comfort along with the sparse news about her brother. June brought warmer weather and increased activity on the ranch. Owen hired 2 additional hands to help with the summer work, and Willow took on the role of cook, in addition to her horse training duties. The evenings often found them all gathered around the outdoor fire pit, sharing meals and stories as the long summer days slowly surrendered to night. Owen noticed a gradual change in his habits. The box of letters remained under his bed, but he reached for it less frequently. Some nights he'd sit on the porch with Willow after Daniel had gone to bed, discussing ranch business that inevitably gave way to more personal conversations. "What was he like?" Owen asked one evening. "Your husband," Willow smiled, her face softening in the firelight. "Caleb was determined. Once he set his mind to something, there was no changing it. He decided we were going to Colorado to make our fortune in silver, and that was that." She sighed. "He was kind, though, never raised his voice to me or Daniel. He would have been a good father, given more time." "How did you manage after he passed?" "Day by day," she replied simply. "I sold what I could, worked where I could. We stayed near the mining camp for a while, but it was no place to raise a child. When I heard Blackwater Ridge needed ranch hands, it seemed like a sign. I grew up on a ranch. It felt like coming home in a way." Owen nodded, understanding the pull of the familiar in times of upheaval. "Elizabeth was like that too, determined. She had our whole life planned out, the ranch, the children we'd have, even the curtains she wanted to hang." He chuckled softly. "I never much cared about curtains, but she insisted they were essential." Willow laughed, the sound carrying in the quiet night. "Caleb was the same about having a proper wood floor. Our first cabin had packed dirt, and he spent every spare moment for 2 months laying planks." "Did you get your wood floor?" "We did, and I cried when we had to leave it behind." She turned to look at him directly. "Tell me more about Elizabeth." It was the first time anyone had asked Owen directly about Elizabeth in years. Most people in town knew the basics of his story and politely avoided the subject. Even Jeremiah, for all his loyalty, never broached the topic. So Owen talked, haltingly at first, then with increasing animation as memories long suppressed came flooding back. He told Willow about meeting Elizabeth at a church social in Missouri, their courtship conducted largely through letters as he worked cattle drives, the plans they'd made for a life in Montana territory. "She never even saw this place," he concluded, his voice growing soft. "Died 2 weeks before we were to leave. Consumption took her so quickly, the doctor said there was nothing to be done." Willow reached out, briefly touching his hand. "I'm sorry, Owen. The letters were all I had left," he explained. "Reading them, answering them, it kept her alive somehow." "I understand," Willow said. "I kept Caleb's shirt under my pillow for months, still have it packed away somewhere. We all find our ways to hold on." The conversation might have continued, but Daniel's call from the cabin door interrupted them. "Mama, I had a bad dream." "Duty calls," Willow said, rising. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Willow." As July approached, bringing with it preparations for Independence Day celebrations in town, Owen received a reply from Winifred Sanderson. Her letter expressed gratitude for his inquiries and shared her increasing worry for her brother. More surprising was her announcement that she planned to travel to Blackwater Ridge herself to continue the search, asking if Owen might recommend suitable accommodations. Owen found himself looking forward to Winifred's visit with unexpected anticipation. There was something about her direct manner that he found refreshing, and he was curious to see if his memory of her matched reality. When he mentioned the impending visit to Willow as they worked side by side repairing a section of fence, her response was politely curious. "A friend from Denver, An acquaintance, Owen clarified. She's searching for her missing brother, the geologist I mentioned. Says she'll be arriving on Tuesday's stage. Willow nodded, hammering a nail with precise strokes. Will she be staying at the hotel in town? I offered her the use of the guest room in the main house, Owen replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Seemed the hospitable thing, given her circumstances. Of course, Willow agreed, her tone neutral. I'll make sure it's prepared properly. The day of Winifred's arrival brought unexpected complications. A summer thunderstorm had washed out part of the road to town, and Owen found himself racing against time to repair his buckboard after a wheel cracked on the rutted path. By the time he reached Blackwater Ridge, the stage had already arrived. He found Winifred waiting patiently at the hotel, her luggage stacked neatly beside her. She wore a traveling suit of deep green that complemented her fair coloring, and her face brightened when she spotted him. Mr. Fairchild, I was beginning to wonder if my letter had gone astray. Mrs. Sanderson, please accept my apologies, Owen said, removing his hat. The storm delayed me. I hope you haven't been waiting long. Not at all. It gave me a chance to inquire about Timothy. Her expression grew serious. No one seems to recall him specifically, but I did learn about several prospectors who went missing this past winter. On the bumpy ride back to the ranch, Winifred shared what little information she'd gathered and her plans to speak with the local sheriff the following day. Owen found himself impressed once again by her determination and practical approach. I've prepared a list of questions, she explained, producing a small notebook from her reticule. And I've brought photographs of Timothy to show around. Someone must have seen him. The high country can be dangerous, Owen cautioned. Even experienced outdoorsmen have been known to get lost or injured. I understand the risks, Mr. Fairchild, but I can't simply abandon the search. Timothy is all the family I have left. They arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Willow was waiting on the porch, Daniel at her side, both dressed in their Sunday best despite it being a Tuesday. Mrs. Sanderson, may I present Mrs. Sullivan and her son, Daniel, Owen said as he helped Winifred down from the wagon. Willow is our horse trainer and has become indispensable to the running of the ranch. If Winifred was surprised by a woman in such a role, she hit it well. A pleasure to meet you both. Please call me Winifred. Dinner that evening was a lively affair, with Daniel peppering Winifred with questions about life in the city and Jeremiah regaling them with tales of his days as a scout for the army. Owen noticed how easily Winifred fit into the group, her natural charm drawing everyone into conversation. Later, as Willow cleared the dishes, refusing Winifred's offer of help, Owen showed his guest to the porch where they could speak privately about her brother. I've made inquiries among the miners who come through, he explained, but the information is sparse. Bishop, the storekeeper, recalls selling supplies to someone matching Timothy's description, but no one has reported seeing him return. Winifred's face fell slightly. I feared as much. The mining company claims he absconded with their equipment and survey documents, but that's nonsense. Timothy was the most honest man I've ever known. What exactly was he looking for up there? Gold, silver? He never said specifically confidentiality with his employers, but he did mention unusual geological formations that might indicate something valuable. She hesitated. There's something else, Owen. In his last letter, Timothy mentioned feeling watched. He thought someone was following him from camp to camp. Owen frowned. Claim jumpers, maybe, or rival mining interests. Whatever it was, it frightened him enough to mention it, which wasn't like my brother at all. Winifred's voice caught slightly. I can't help feeling that if I'd come sooner. Without thinking, Owen reached out to cover her hand with his. You couldn't have known. And we'll find answers, I promise you that. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Owen felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years. Winifred smiled softly, turning her hand to briefly squeeze his before withdrawing it. The sound of the door opening broke the moment as Willow stepped onto the porch. Excuse me, I've prepared coffee if you'd like some. That sounds wonderful, Winifred replied, standing, and then I should turn in. It's been a long day of travel. As Winifred retired for the evening, Owen found himself alone with Willow in the kitchen. She seems very determined, Willow observed as she washed the last of the dishes. She is, Owen agreed. Reminds me of someone else I know. He gave her a pointed look that made Willow smile despite herself. I'm merely practical, not determined, she countered. There's a difference, if you say so. Owen dried a plate and placed it on the shelf. Though I recall you insisting on rebreaking that fence line yourself last month because the hands wouldn't do it properly. Willow laughed softly. Perhaps we're both right. She paused, then added more seriously. Do you think she'll find her brother? Owen sighed. Honestly. If he went into the high country alone 3 months ago and hasn't returned, I'm not optimistic, but I didn't have the heart to say that to her face. You're a good man, Owen Fairchild, Willow said quietly, hanging the dish towel to dry. Good night. As she slipped out the door, Owen found himself watching her go, a confusion of emotions stirring within him that he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The next morning, Owen rode with Winifred into town to speak with Sheriff Taylor, a gruff former cavalryman who maintained order in Blackwater Ridge with minimal fuss. Taylor listened to Winifred's story with professional attention, examining the photograph of Timothy Sanderson with narrowed eyes. Can't say I recall seeing him specifically, the sheriff admitted, but we've had reports of strangers up in the high country this past winter, mostly keeping to themselves, but a few of the trappers mentioned feeling unwelcome in areas they've worked for years. Claim jumpers, Owen suggested. Taylor shrugged. Maybe or maybe something else. There's been talk of a mining company buying up claims quiet-like, using strong-arm tactics when necessary. What company? Winifred asked sharply. Continental Mining and Exploration, I believe, based out of Denver. Winifred paled. That's who Timothy worked for. The revelation added a new dimension to the mystery. If Timothy had discovered something his employers wanted to keep secret, it might explain both his disappearance and the company's claim that he'd stolen from them. I need to see where he was last headed, Winifred declared as they left the sheriff's office. Do you know anyone who could guide me to the high country, Owen? It's dangerous territory, especially for a woman alone. I won't be alone if I have a guide, she countered. And I'm more capable than I look. I've accompanied Timothy on expeditions before. Owen hesitated, weighing his responsibilities at the ranch against the promise he'd made to help. Let me see what I can arrange, but I won't allow you to put yourself in unnecessary danger. That evening, as they discussed options around the dinner table, Jeremiah suggested a compromise. Miller's Creek. It's a former mining camp about a day's ride north. If your brother was surveying that area, he would have passed through there. Old Sam Miller still lives up there, knows every inch of those mountains and everyone who passes through. Could we reach it and return in a day? Winifred asked hopefully. Jeremiah shook his head. It's a 2 or 3 day journey, depending on conditions. I can manage things here, Willow offered unexpectedly. You should go, Owen. Help Winifred find answers. Owen looked at her in surprise. Are you sure, with the new foals and the summer work? The hands know what needs doing, and I can supervise the rest, Willow insisted. Family is important. If it were Daniel missing, I'd want every possible help finding him. The decision made, Owen and Winifred prepared to depart 2 days later, packing supplies for what might be a 4-day journey round trip. The evening before they were to leave, Owen found himself once more on the porch, the box of Elizabeth's letters in his lap. For the first time in months, he felt a strange guilt as he opened the familiar envelopes. Was he betraying Elizabeth's memory by helping Winifred? By feeling this odd connection to her, or by the confusing feelings that sometimes surfaced when he spoke with Willow? I don't know what to do, Lizzie, he whispered, tracing the elegant handwriting with his finger. I promised to love you forever, and I meant it. But you're gone, and I'm still here, and sometimes it feels like I'm just existing, not living. The soft creak of the porch step interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to find Willow standing there, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to check if you needed anything for your journey tomorrow. Owen hastily gathered the letters. No, it's fine. I was just talking to Elizabeth, Willow finished for him, her voice gentle. Owen, may I say something personal? He nodded, unable to find words. Willow moved closer, sitting beside him on the porch swing. "Stop talking to the dead," she whispered, her voice so soft he barely heard it. "They can't answer you, and they wouldn't want you living half a life for their sake." The words hit him with physical force, as if she'd struck him. "You don't understand, I do understand," she insisted, her green eyes intense in the fading light. "I understand completely. When Caleb died, I was so angry at him for leaving me, at God for taking him, at myself for not somehow preventing it. I wrote him letters too, letters I burned without sending because there was nowhere to send them." Owen stared at her, seeing not pity in her eyes but genuine empathy. "Elizabeth loved you," Willow continued. "I never met her, but I know that much from the way you speak of her. Would she want you to spend your life in conversation with paper and ink, or would she want you to live, Owen, to really live?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable and yet demanding a response. Before Owen could formulate one, Willow stood. "I've overstepped," she said quietly. "I apologize. Safe travels tomorrow." As she walked away, Owen felt something shift within him, like ice breaking on a frozen river. He looked down at the letters in his hands, precious, irreplaceable, but ultimately one-sided conversations with a woman who would never again turn the page or dip a pen in ink. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps Willow was right. Morning came with a hint of autumn in the air, despite it being only late July. Owen loaded the last of their supplies onto the pack horses as Winifred said goodbye to Daniel, who had apparently appointed himself her special friend during her short stay. "You'll bring Mr. Owen back safe, won't you?" the boy asked solemnly. Winifred knelt to his level. "I promise. And when we return, I'll tell you all about our adventure." Willow approached, handing Owen a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Extra provisions," she explained, "and there's a jar of my blackberry preserves. I know how you favor them." "Thank you," Owen said, their eyes meeting briefly. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of their conversation the previous night. "Be careful," Willow added, her voice dropping. "Both of you." The journey north took them through increasingly rugged terrain, the foothills gradually giving way to steeper slopes covered in pine and aspen. They made camp the first night by a small stream, where Owen demonstrated to an impressed Winifred how to catch trout with a simple line and hook. "Timothy tried to teach me once," she recalled as they cooked their catch over the fire. "I was hopeless, too impatient," he said. Owen smiled. "Patience is the key to most things worth doing. Is that what ranching has taught you? Patience?" "That, and the futility of fighting nature," he replied, turning the fish carefully. "You can work with the seasons, the weather, the land, but try to fight them, and you'll lose every time." As they ate, Winifred shared more about her life in Denver, her work as a teacher, her brief marriage to a banker who died of yellow fever, her close relationship with her brother. In turn, Owen found himself talking about his cattle driving days, his decision to settle in Montana territory, and eventually, Elizabeth. "She sounds remarkable," Winifred said when he described Elizabeth's determination to create a home in the wilderness. "You must miss her terribly." "Every day," Owen admitted. "But someone recently suggested that perhaps I've been honoring her memory in the wrong way." "Oh," Owen hesitated, then explained about the letters and his nightly ritual of reading and responding to them. "Willow said I should stop talking to the dead. That Elizabeth wouldn't want me living half a life." Winifred considered this, her face thoughtful in the firelight. "That's rather bold advice." "It was," Owen agreed, "but I've been wondering if she might be right. The letters, they're a way of holding on to something that's gone. Maybe it's time I started letting go, a little at a time." "And is that why you agreed to this journey? As a way of moving forward?" The question was perceptive, cutting to the heart of something Owen hadn't fully acknowledged to himself. "Perhaps. Though I also promised to help you find answers about your brother." Winifred smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We all have our ghosts, Owen. The trick is learning to live alongside them without letting them consume us." They reached Miller's Creek by mid-afternoon the following day, a collection of weathered cabins nestled in a narrow valley. Most stood empty, abandoned after the small strike that had briefly brought life to the area played out. Only one showed signs of habitation, smoke curling from the chimney, and a mule tethered outside. Sam Miller proved to be exactly as Jeremiah had described. A grizzled mountain man in his 60s with a long white beard and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He invited them into his cabin with gruff hospitality, offering coffee that could have stripped paint from a barn door. Sanderson, he mused after examining the photograph Winifred produced. Yeah, I remember him. Educated fella, asking all sorts of questions about the old Spanish silver mines. Said he was working for Continental. When was this? Winifred pressed, leaning forward eagerly. Early March, I reckon. Snow was still deep. He stayed here a couple nights, then headed up towards Serpent Ridge. Did he return this way? Miller shook his head. Never saw him again. But he wasn't the only one asking questions about those old mines. Week before he came through, there was another group, 4 men well armed, said they were hunters, but they had surveying equipment with them. Owen and Winifred exchanged glances. Also from Continental? Owen asked. Didn't say, but they had that corporate look about them. One fella in particular, mean-eyed with a scar across his cheek, seemed to be in charge. Left the same day your brother arrived, as I recall. Miller scratched his beard thoughtfully. Come to think of it, they returned about 2 weeks later, looking like they'd been through some trouble. The scarred one had his arm in a sling. Did they say anything about encountering anyone else up there? Not directly, but I overheard something about taking care of the problem. Didn't think much of it at the time, figured they meant a bear or mountain lion. Winifred paled visibly. You think they might have? She couldn't finish the sentence. Can't say for certain, Miller replied carefully. But if your brother found something valuable up there and his employers didn't want it known, well, it wouldn't be the first time someone disappeared in these mountains. Where exactly is Serpent Ridge? Owen asked, his voice tight. Miller moved to a crude map tacked to the wall. Here, he said, pointing to a winding formation about 15 miles northeast. Treacherous territory, sheer drops, unstable ground. The old Spanish mine entrances are scattered throughout, most caved in long ago. If someone wanted to make a man disappear, that'd be the place to do it. They spent the night at Miller's cabin, the old man generously offering them floor space and additional information about the terrain they would face. Winifred remained silent through much of the evening, the possibility that her brother had met with foul play clearly weighing heavily on her. As they prepared their bedrolls, Owen spoke softly so Miller wouldn't overhear. We don't have to continue if you don't want to, Winifred. We can return to Blackwater Ridge and inform the sheriff of what we've learned. She shook her head firmly. I need to know what happened to him, Owen. If there's even a chance he's alive up there, I have to try to find him, and if he's not, I need to bring him home properly. It could be dangerous, he warned. If these men are still in the area, I understand the risk, she interrupted, but would you do any less for someone you loved? Owen thought of Elizabeth, of the grief that had consumed him after her death. Would he have risked everything to save her if he'd had the chance? Without question. We'll leave at first light, he decided, but we stick together, and at the first sign of trouble we turn back, agreed. Winifred nodded, relief evident in her expression. Agreed, and Owen, thank you. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you offered to make inquiries. I gave my word I'd help, he said simply, and some promises need to be kept no matter the cost. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains, the July sun not yet high enough to warm the alpine air. Miller provided them with crude but accurate directions to Serpent Ridge, along with a warning to be back before nightfall. Those mountains have claimed better men than most, he cautioned as they mounted up. Don't add yourselves to the tally. The trail grew steadily more difficult as they ascended, eventually forcing them to leave the horses tethered in a small meadow and continue on foot. The final approach to Serpent Ridge required climbing a narrow path that wound between massive boulders, the drop to their right growing steeper with each step. Look there, Owen said suddenly, pointing to a disturbed area of ground ahead. Someone's been here recently. They approached cautiously to find the remnants of a camp, a fire pit with cold ashes, scraps of paper, a broken pencil. Winifred knelt, picking up one of the papers with trembling hands. This is Timothy's handwriting, she confirmed, showing Owen the fragment of what appeared to be survey notes. He was here. They searched the area thoroughly, finding more evidence of habitation but nothing to indicate what had happened to Timothy. The camp had been abandoned in haste, supplies left behind, a canteen half full of stale water. "There's blood here," Owen said grimly, examining a dark stain on a flat rock. "Not much, but..." Winifred's face set in determination. "We need to check the mine entrances. If something happened, that's where they would have." She couldn't finish the thought, but Owen understood. If Timothy had been killed, an abandoned mine shaft would be the perfect place to conceal the body. According to Miller's information, there were 3 known mine entrances on Serpent Ridge. The first they found easily a collapsed opening that clearly hadn't been disturbed in decades. The second was partially open, but showed no signs of recent activity. The third proved more difficult to locate, hidden behind a stand of stunted pines on a precarious ledge. As they approached, Owen held out an arm to stop Winifred. "There's fresh debris here," he whispered, pointing to newly disturbed earth around the entrance. "And look, boot prints." The mine opening was larger than the others, shored up with timbers that looked surprisingly new. Owen drew his revolver, motioning for Winifred to stay behind him as they cautiously approached. A sound from within the scrape of metal against stone froze them in place. Someone was inside. Owen put a finger to his lips, then called out, "Hello, the mine, anyone in there?" Silence, then a weak voice responded. "Who's there?" Winifred gasped. Timothy, is that you, Winnie?" The voice sounded disbelieving. "My God, Winnie, is that really you?" They rushed forward into the darkness of the mine shaft, Owen striking a match to light their way. The flickering flame revealed a man chained to the wall about 20 feet in thin, bearded but unmistakably the man from the photograph. "Timothy," Winifred cried, running to her brother and falling to her knees beside him. "What happened? Who did this to you?" "Continental," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I found evidence they've been falsifying surveys claiming worthless land as valuable and selling shares based on fraudulent reports. When I confronted Blackwood, Blackwood." Owen interrupted, examining the heavy padlock securing the chains. "Edwin Blackwood, Continental's chief of operations," Timothy explained. "He ordered his men to take care of me. They beat me, brought me here, said they'd come back to finish the job once the investors had committed." "When?" Owen demanded, a sense of urgency rising. "When are they coming back?" "Soon. They've been bringing me water and scraps every few days. Last time they were here yesterday. I think they said it would be the last visit." Owen set to work on the padlock with his knife, trying to force it open. "We need to get you out of here now." The sound of horses in the distance sent a chill through him. "Too late. Hide," Timothy hissed. "If they find you here, they'll kill us all." Owen pulled Winifred into the shadows deeper in the shaft, positioning himself where he could see the entrance while remaining concealed. Minutes later, 3 men appeared at the mine opening, silhouetted against the daylight. "Time to say goodbye, Professor," called a mocking voice. "Boss says the investors are all in, so we don't need to keep you alive anymore." "Blackwood won't get away with this," Timothy replied, his voice stronger than before. "The truth will come out eventually." "Maybe so, but you won't be around to see it," replied the man, stepping further into the mine. As he came into view, Owen could see the scar Miller had described cutting across his right cheek. Owen waited until all 3 men were fully inside the mine before making his move. "That's far enough," he called, stepping from the shadows with his revolver trained on them. The men whirled in surprise, reaching for their weapons. Owen fired a warning shot that echoed deafeningly in the confined space. "Next one won't miss," he warned. "Drop your guns." For a tense moment, it seemed the men might resist. Then, assessing the situation, they slowly placed their weapons on the ground. "Now the key to those chains," Owen demanded. The scarred man glared but reached into his pocket, producing a small key that he tossed toward Timothy. Winifred darted out to retrieve it, quickly unlocking her brother's restraints. "You've got no idea what you're interfering with," the scarred man growled. "Blackwood has connections all the way to Washington. This won't end well for you." "It's already not ending well for you," Owen replied evenly. "Now move over there, against the wall." Using the chains that had held Timothy, they secured the 3 men to an embedded support beam. Timothy, though weak from his ordeal, insisted on walking out under his own power, supported by Winifred. "We need to get to the sheriff," he said as they emerged into the sunlight. I have evidence hidden in my boot that proves what Continental has been doing. The return journey to Miller's Creek was slow, with Timothy requiring frequent rests. They reached the old miner's cabin by nightfall, where Miller provided food and his own bed for the injured geologist. What will you do now? Owen asked as they sat around the fire later that evening, Timothy having fallen into an exhausted sleep. Winifred sighed, rubbing her temples. First, ensure Timothy receives proper medical care. Then take his evidence to the authorities in Denver. Continental Mining has investors across the country. This fraud could ruin hundreds of families. And what about the men we left in the mine? Miller has already sent word to the sheriff in the nearest proper town, she assured him. They should be rescued and arrested by tomorrow. Owen nodded, staring into the flames. The events of the day had unleashed a flood of emotions he was still processing. The danger they'd faced, the relief of finding Timothy alive, the satisfaction of thwarting men who would commit murder for profit, it all combined to make him feel more alive than he had in years. And beneath it all, a realization was forming, crystallizing with each passing hour. Willow had been right. He had been talking to the dead while life continued without him. Today, he had chosen to fully participate in the world again, and it had made all the difference. They returned to Blackwater Ridge 3 days later, Timothy well enough to ride slowly with frequent rests. Winifred had sent telegrams from the nearest station, alerting authorities in Denver to Continental's crimes and requesting an investigation. As they approached Owen's ranch, he saw a figure waiting on the porch. Willow, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. She hurried down the steps as they drew closer, relief evident in her expression. "You're back," she called, then noticed the additional rider. "And you found your brother." Winifred smiled warmly. "We did, thanks to Owen. He was magnificent." Willow faced down 3 armed men without flinching. Willow's eyes widened as she looked to Owen for confirmation. "Is this true?" "It wasn't quite that dramatic," he demurred, dismounting. "But we did find Timothy imprisoned in an abandoned mine. It's a long story." "One I want to hear," Willow insisted, helping Timothy down from his horse. "But first, let's get you all inside. You must be exhausted." Over dinner, they recounted their adventure, with Winifred and Timothy taking turns explaining Continental's scheme and how it had led to Timothy's captivity. Daniel listened with wide-eyed fascination, declaring it better than any dime novel story. "You'll be returning to Denver then?" Willow asked when they had finished. Timothy nodded. "As soon as I'm strong enough to travel, the authorities will need my testimony and I have research papers to recover. And I should accompany him," Winifred added, glancing at Owen. "Though I admit, I've grown fond of Blackwater Ridge in my short time here." Later that evening, after everyone else had retired, Owen found himself once more on the porch, but this time without Elizabeth's letters. Instead, he sat watching the stars, reflecting on the changes of the past week. The soft sound of the door opening announced Willow's presence before he saw her. "May I join you?" she asked. "Please," he replied, moving to make space on the swing. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes before Willow spoke. "I worried about you, you know. When you didn't return on schedule. I'm sorry for causing you concern," Owen said sincerely. "Things became complicated, so I gathered." She hesitated, then added, "Winifred seems very fond of you." Owen glanced at her, surprised by the observation. "We've been through an intense experience together. That creates a kind of bond." "Is that all it is?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had voiced before. Owen took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Winifred is a remarkable woman," he began. "Brave, intelligent, determined, in another life perhaps. But not in this one." Willow's voice was carefully neutral. Owen turned to face her directly. "Willow, when you told me to stop talking to the dead, it struck me harder than I let on. You were right, I've been half-living, clinging to memories instead of making new ones. And now I realize that life continues whether we choose to participate or not." He reached out tentatively, covering her hand with his. "The past few months, working alongside you, watching you with Daniel, it's awakened something in me I thought had died with Elizabeth." Willow's breath caught. Owen, you don't need to say anything, he assured her quickly. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that your words made a difference. You helped me see that honoring Elizabeth's memory doesn't mean refusing to live. Willow turned her hand beneath his, intertwining their fingers. Grief is a strange journey, she said softly. No clear path, no definite destination. We each find our way through it as best we can. And sometimes we find unexpected companions along the way, Owen added, squeezing her hand gently. The morning brought practical matters to attend to. Timothy needed to see the doctor in town, and Winifred had letters to write regarding their discoveries. Owen arranged for both to stay at the hotel in Blackwater Ridge until Timothy was strong enough for the journey to Denver. As he helped Winifred with her luggage, she drew him aside for a private word. I want to thank you properly, Owen, what you did for us. I can never repay that debt. There's no debt to repay, he assured her. I'm just glad we found Timothy alive. Winifred studied his face with keen eyes. There's something different about you since we returned. Something has changed. Owen smiled slightly. Perhaps I've finally taken some good advice about living in the present. Willow's advice, Winifred surmised with a knowing look. I suspected there might be something between you two. I'm not sure what there is exactly, Owen admitted, but I'm open to finding out. Winifred placed a hand on his arm. Good. Life is too precious to waste on what might have been. Elizabeth would want you to be happy, Owen, I'm certain of that. Thank you, he said simply. Will you write when you reach Denver? I'd like to know how things proceed with Continental. Of course. She hesitated, then added, and perhaps I might visit again someday under less dramatic circumstances. You'll always be welcome at Fairchild Ranch, he promised. The days that followed settled into a new pattern. Owen found himself spending more evenings with Willow and Daniel, teaching the boy to fish or ride, discussing the day's work with Willow as the sun set. The box of Elizabeth's letters remained under his bed, but he no longer felt compelled to read them each night. One evening in early August, he invited Willow to ride with him to a special spot on the property, a hilltop overlooking the valley, where wildflowers still bloomed in vibrant patches. It's beautiful, she said as they dismounted. How did you find this place? I used to come here to read Elizabeth's letters, he admitted. It felt peaceful somehow. Willow nodded in understanding. And now I wanted to share it with you. Owen took a deep breath. Willow, these past months have taught me that grief doesn't end, but it does change. It becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. I know exactly what you mean, she said softly. I'll always love Elizabeth, he continued, just as you'll always love Caleb. They're part of who we are, but I've realized something important. Loving someone who's gone doesn't mean you can't also love someone who's here. Willow's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Owen, I'm not asking for promises, he said quickly. Just permission to see where this might lead. To discover if two people who understand loss might also understand healing together. For answer, Willow stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face gently. I think we already know where it's leading, she whispered. The question is whether we're both ready for that journey. Owen covered her hand with his, turning to press a kiss to her palm. I believe I am, and you, I am, she confirmed, her voice steadying. Daniel adores you, you know. He asked me just yesterday if you might be his new papa someday. And what did you tell him? That some questions don't need immediate answers, that we should enjoy each day as it comes. She smiled up at him. But privately, I hoped the answer might eventually be yes. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, an acknowledgement of shared grief and budding hope. When they parted, Owen felt lighter than he had in years, as though a burden had been set down at last. I should tell you, he said as they remounted their horses, I've been thinking about expanding the ranch. There's good land available to the east, enough to double our grazing capacity. That's ambitious, Willow replied with interest. What brought this on? The future, Owen said simply. For the first time in years, I'm thinking about the future again. September brought Timothy and Winifred back to Blackwater Ridge, briefly on their way to Washington, D.C., where Timothy would testify before a congressional committee about Continental Mining's fraud. The investigation had expanded, revealing corruption that reached into territorial governments across the West. Edwin Blackwood has fled to Europe, Timothy explained over dinner at the ranch. But several of his associates have been arrested, including the men we left in the mine. It's caused quite the stir in financial circles. You've become something of a hero, Winifred added, smiling at her brother. The newspapers are calling it the Continental Mining Scandal. Owen shook his head in amazement, all because you refused to falsify your reports. Integrity shouldn't be heroic, Timothy replied modestly. It should be expected. As they prepared to depart the following morning, Winifred drew Owen aside once more. I see I was right about you and Willow, she said, nodding toward where Willow stood with Daniel, adjusting the boy's collar. Owen followed her gaze, a smile tugging at his lips. We're taking things slowly, but you're happy, Winifred finished for him. It shows, Owen, in both of you. Thank you for understanding, she laughed lightly. How could I not? We helped save my brother's life together. That creates a bond, but not necessarily a romantic one. Her expression grew more serious. I hope you know I'll always consider you a dear friend, and I you, he replied sincerely. Safe travels, Winifred, write when you can. As autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Owen finally did something he'd been contemplating for weeks. One clear October morning, he rode to the highest point on his property, the box of Elizabeth's letters secure in his saddlebag. At the summit, he dismounted and found a flat rock to sit upon. One by one, he removed the letters from their box, reading each one last time before carefully returning it to the container. When he had finished, he closed the lid and placed the box on the rock beside him. I'll always love you, Lizzie, he said aloud, his voice carried away by the wind. But Willow was right, you wouldn't want me talking to the dead when there's so much life to be lived. I think you'd like her. She's strong like you were, determined, full of life. He sat in silence for several minutes, watching an eagle soar over the valley below. For the first time, the memory of Elizabeth brought more comfort than pain. I'm not saying goodbye, he clarified, just making space for what comes next. When he returned to the ranch that afternoon, he found Willow in the barn, brushing down a newly acquired mare. Daniel sat nearby on a hay bale, whittling a piece of wood with the small knife Owen had given him for his birthday. How was your ride? Willow asked, noting his thoughtful expression. Good, he replied, clarifying. She tilted her head questioningly but didn't press for details. Instead, she said, Daniel and I were thinking of riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Would you like to join us? I would, Owen said, then added with sudden determination, and perhaps we might have dinner at the hotel afterward, the three of us. Daniel looked up with excitement. Like a real family, Owen and Willow exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Yes, Owen said, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Like a family. The first snow of winter dusted Blackwater Ridge in early December, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Owen stood on the porch of the main house, their house now, since Willow and Daniel had moved in 6 weeks earlier, watching as Daniel attempted to build a snowman in the yard. Willow joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. He's been out there for an hour, she observed with amusement, determined to make it taller than himself. Reminds me of someone else I know, Owen teased, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, comfortable in the gesture that had become natural between them. The letter you were expecting arrived today, she said, producing an envelope from her pocket. From Winifred. Owen opened it eagerly, scanning the elegant handwriting. The congressional hearings have concluded, he reported. Several Continental executives have been indicted, and Timothy has been offered a position with the Geological Survey. That's wonderful news, Willow said. And Winifred, she's decided to remain in Washington for now, working as a teacher at a ladies' academy. He chuckled at the postscript. She says the city lacks the excitement of abandoned mine shafts and armed confrontations, but she's adjusting. They watched in companionable silence as Daniel struggled to lift a large snowball onto his creation. When it fell apart, Willow called, "Why don't you ask for help, sweetheart?" "I can do it," the boy insisted, already beginning to form another. "Stubborn," Owen commented. "Like his mother," Willow acknowledged with a smile. And perhaps like his future father as well, the question, casually posed, carried weight that both recognized. Owen turned to face her fully. "Willow Sullivan, are you proposing to me?" She laughed, color rising in her cheeks. "I believe that's traditionally the man's role. And I believe you've never been one for adhering to tradition," he countered, taking her hands in his. "But as it happens, I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band set with a small emerald. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The stone reminded me of your eyes." Willow's breath caught. "Owen." "I love you," he said simply. "You and Daniel both. You brought life back to this ranch and to me. Will you marry me?" Her answer was interrupted by a whoop of triumph from the yard as Daniel successfully crowned his snowman with a battered hat. "Look," he called. "I did it, we see." Willow called back, her eyes never leaving Owen's face. "And yes," she added softly, "I will marry you." The wedding took place on Christmas Eve in the small church in Blackwater Ridge, with Jeremiah serving as best man and Daniel proudly bearing the rings. Timothy and Winifred traveled from Washington for the occasion, bringing news that Continental's assets had been seized and portions would be distributed to investors who had been defrauded. A fitting end to the scandal, Timothy observed at the small reception held at the hotel afterward. "And a fitting beginning for you both." Later that night, as snow fell gently outside the bedroom window of their home, Owen held Willow close, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this," he confessed. "I was lost in the past, talking to ghosts. And now," Willow asked, her head resting on his chest. "Now I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," he replied, kissing her gently. "With the living." Spring came early to Blackwater Ridge in 1876, bringing with it new life and new beginnings. The ranch expansion Owen had envisioned was underway, with additional hands hired to manage the increased workload. Daniel, now nearly 7, had started school in town and returned each day bubbling with new knowledge. And Willow, to the joy of all, was expecting their first child in late summer. "A girl, I think," she declared one evening as they sat on the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for end-of-day conversations. "She's restless, like her father." Owen placed a gentle hand on her rounded stomach, feeling the flutter of movement beneath, "or determined like her mother." "Either way, she'll be loved," Willow said softly. "Beyond measure," Owen agreed. As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky, Owen reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From grief so profound, he could speak only to the memory of his lost love, to a life rich with new purpose and joy. He thought of Elizabeth, sometimes still how could he not? But the sharp pain of loss had gradually transformed into a gentle acknowledgement of what had been and what might have been. She would always be part of his story, just as Caleb would always be part of Willow's. But their new chapter, written together, had only just begun. And when their daughter arrived in August, Elizabeth Willow Fairchild, named for the past they honored, and the future they embraced, Owen knew with certainty that his long conversation with the dead had finally ended, replaced by the infinitely more rewarding dialogue of the living.